Your source for everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, Merry Meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Para-X Radio Network. The opening song tonight was Lost Souls by Midnight Syndicate. And I'm sure my guest tonight, Richard Carradine, may have run into one or two lost souls in doing what he does. That's because Richard is the co-founder of GHOULA, Ghost Hunters of Urban Los Angeles, and it's a group that celebrates Southern California's ghost lore and haunted history. In the past decade, he's conducted ghostly walking tours and bus tours and house tours and subway tours and hosted numerous ghost-themed events in very unusual haunted places, from meetups in haunted bars to puppet shows in a haunted puppet theater. The idea behind these spooky activities is always to have fun with our local history and to get people to explore the far corners of LA County. And because of his expertise on regional ghost tales, his knowledge has been sought out by historical societies, television producers, and the press. And over the years, the LA Weekly has declared their annual Best of LA issue, in their Best of LA issues, that he's the best host to toast a ghost. And Richard is also the author of The Park After Dark, the original unauthorized guide to the happiest haunted place on Earth, and Spirits with Spirits, a guide to the haunted bars of Los Angeles. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Good to be here.
That was a mouthful, wasn't it? Yeah.
It sounds impressive.
Well, yeah, I was. I mean, and you should be too. Yes, got a lot of chops behind you. We have a ton of stuff to talk about tonight, but I'd like to start out by finding out how you got interested in ghosts and hauntings and how that eventually led to the creation of GHOULA.
All right. I have. Where do I start? I've always kind of been interested in ghosts and the paranormal. I grew up in a haunted house, which probably has a lot to do with it. Mm-hmm. But I'm the kind of guy that, if I'm at any place that feels the slightest bit historical, mm-hmm. if it's an old movie theater or an old restaurant, I will always ask somebody before I leave, any ghost stories, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen? And more often than not, you do get a ghost story. Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of, since I was a kid, just have been collecting all these ghost stories in various places around LA. And mm-hmm. the way GHOULA, I guess, got started was I was sitting around with a group of friends, and we were talking about haunted places, local haunted places. And mm-hmm. the idea occurred that wouldn't it be fun if there was a group where, that was the idea, not an investigation group, not where you go out and investigate, but just kind of a casual social group where you could go hang out with people and talk about ghosts. Mm-hmm. And we looked on the internet and found out that Los Angeles had no such club.
Right.
So we started one. Mm-hmm. And we started with Spirits with Spirits, which was our monthly meetup at a haunted bar, mm-hmm. Where we would get together, talk about the history of the bar, talk about the folklore and the ghost stories, and have drinks and kind of hang out and mm-hmm. socialize. and just, I guess, from there, we've branched out into done other sort of ghost-themed events throughout the years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of in a nutshell how it all got started.
You've got a whole lot of stuff going. I mean, I've been over to the GHOULA website or the blog site or whatever. I have website, but it's called blog site.
Right.
But tons and tons of stuff going on. Now, being a ghost hunter that you are, some people believe that there's a distinction between a ghost and a spirit. They classify a ghost as kind of an earthbound spirit that haunts, and a spirit being just a soul who has passed but doesn't moan, wail, or scare the bejesus out of people. Any thoughts on that?
Not specifically, because over the years I've heard different definitions of ghosts
Mm-hmm.
and spirits, and poltergeists and demons and various things.
Right.
And so I don't know. In my way of thinking, I haven't hit upon the universal sort of definition for all that stuff. So kind of in my head, I kind of interchange the terms.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't really looked for distinctions between them, or at least the names for distinctions between, or classifying them, I guess, is your question.
Right.
I don't know. Did I answer?
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's kind of the best answer, because you know what? Nobody knows for sure. I mean, it's just...
Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At this point in time, we really don't know,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess kind of is what makes it fun about it.
It does. And you know what? I mean, I've said this before, and so people are going, oh, she said it again, that I don't think we're meant to know it all. I think we're meant to be teased by it all, but I don't think we're meant to ever find out for sure. You know?
Well, I like to think. I heard the story once about there were these, a couple hundred years ago, these farmers would collect these really strange rocks in France,
Mm-hmm.
in the rural areas. They would find these very unusual rocks, and they couldn't explain because they didn't match the other rocks in the area.
Right.
They couldn't explain where they came from, and a few farmers actually claimed to have seen them drop out of the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
And so they took their collection of rocks to the local university and tried to get an explanation. And, the academic world just kind of laughed at them, saying,
Mm-hmm.
Obviously rocks don't drop out of the sky. They don't drop out of clouds. Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously these rural bumpkins are making this up or whatever, or they're just naive, and so the farmers kind of took their rocks back to their farms and would put them on their mantles and collect them every now and then when they'd find one. And of course, now we jump 200 years into to the future, and there isn't an astronomy textbook that doesn't have a chapter on meteorites.
Mm-hmm.
So even though they didn't understand it back then and kind of scoffed at the common man for suggesting this, we now know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel the same is true with ghosts, whereas
Right.
I have a feeling at some point in the future, and it could be a couple hundred years, we'll kind of understand what it is, and it may be something very mundane.
Mm-hmm.
It might be something that has nothing to do with dead people, for all we know. But right now, we're still in that phase where we don't know, and enough people have experienced this that clearly something is going on, but yet the sort of academic world hasn't really caught up to us yet, or caught on yet, to what exactly it is.
Exactly.
So I think at some point we will know, but it may take a couple hundred years.
Well, we'll probably be back a couple of times by then, so we'll probably be around. Just look a little different and whatever, but we'll be around.
Right.
All right, so here's a basic Ghost Hunters question 101. You've investigated tons of locations all over the world for many years, and you've encountered, lots of different things. Have you ever encountered a full-blown apparition?
And yes, the quick answer. And let me just clarify the term ghost hunter, because I'm not your typical, I don't do paranormal investigations like people generally think of, or like you see on reality shows.
Right.
I'm more of the, researcher historian type.
Mm-hmm.
I track these stories down, and I collect these stories, and I interview people. That's my angle on this. So
Yeah.
it's ghost hunter in the sense of I look for ghosts as opposed to trying to prove ghosts, I guess,
Yeah,
or prove their existence.
Yeah, good clarification. I was using a generic term, but I was going to even say that. Let me just say this: that when I liked what you had on your website about proving or about how proving or disproving this actual spiritual activity isn't what motivates you. You know, you are
Right.
more interested in collecting the stories and eyewitness accounts, and to me, that kind of proves that you're in it for the right reasons, and that's very refreshing. So I just thought I'd throw that at you because you don't want to.
Okay.
You don't want to be on TV, and you know, you're not doing it just because you can. And that's
and to digress for a moment before I answer your question about the apparition. I found in doing this that, because like I said, that I just over the years just collected all these stories, and I realized that you would go to a restaurant, let's say, and you'd ask about ghosts, and you'd talk to the waitress, and then she would refer you to the manager, and he would tell you his stories, and then the security guard would tell you their stories.
Yep.
And I realized that it's the kind of thing where it's kind of like I like to call it the hidden history. It's the kind of thing where everybody who works at that restaurant knows all the stories. But anyone outside of that circle has no clue that this is going on in that restaurant. And I found that with all these places that I went to, that they all knew the stories, but nobody outside of that group knew the stories. And I thought, it's a shame that nobody knows these stories outside that circle. And what happens when a restaurant closes and those people leave? We lose those stories. So kind of one of the missions of GHOULA was sort of to preserve those stories, to kind of document those stories, to write them down so that future generations would have these stories that are typically just passed orally from person to person or employee to employee at these individual places.
And that's what I did for my books, too, so I know where you're coming from.
Yes,
I went
exactly.
to odd places, and and
so that they're down on paper and they won't be lost. Because I don't know, I find these stories fascinating, and I think they not only illuminate a little bit of the history of these places in a different way,
right?
But it's just it's like the folklore of people. Our ghost stories. These are the stories that people tell each other, and I always think, wouldn't it be nice if 200 years ago there was somebody who was writing these things down?
Yeah.
And we could see what, colonial America, what kind of ghost stories they told each other. That kind of a thing. So anyway, that's kind of the reason that I do it, partly. But to get to your original question, sorry for the roundabout.
No,
way.
This is a very roundabout show. I mean, there's, you don't get slapped on the knuckles if you, go away for a minute and come back. It's okay.
So, I'll tell you my personal experience, and I can tell you things that have happened at GHOULA events. But many years ago, I was in a house. A friend of mine owned the house in Pasadena. It was one of those craftsman style houses, those old style that you find in Pasadena. And I got to kind of lay out the geography to explain this origin, so bear with me for a moment.
No.
So when you walk in through the front door, it's a big wooden front door. And when you push the door open, you look in, there's an entry area, there's a parlor off to your right side, and then to your left side there's a stairwell that goes up around the entry area to a second floor landing. And obviously the bedrooms and everything are upstairs. Now if you were to step into this little entry room and turn around, right next to that door, that front door, is a little tiny door with a hallway beyond it. Tiny enough that when you open the front door completely, you cover up that hole. And that little hallway basically is a little windowless hallway that shoots all the way to the kitchen. And I was told that the reason for this sort of awkward hall was back in the days when they had servants, that would be how the servants would answer the front door. They would, the doorbell would ring, they'd go from the kitchen through that hallway, answer the door, announce the guests, and then they could slip back into that little hallway, straight back to the kitchen. so that the servants never had to walk through the main part of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm hanging out with my friends who own the house, this woman, a friend of mine, and it's late at night. There's like a bunch of us at the house, and I'm going to take a shortcut through that little hallway to the kitchen to get like a soda or something to drink. And I'm walking through the entry room, and I look up, and I see coming down the stairway a woman in a white dress, like and it's like kind of Victorian style, very elaborate embroidery, and she's holding up the her dress a little bit as she steps down as she walks down the steps, black hair. And I'm watching her walk down the stairs as I'm cutting through the room, and I realize as I'm cutting through the room that the bottom of the stairs is right where that the little door with the hallway is. So in a couple of moments, because that's where I'm going, we're going to be face to face. And I keep looking up, and she's not looking back at me. She's just walking down the stairs, and so my thought is, I'm gonna startle her. She clearly doesn't see me. She's coming down the stairs, and I'm walking right in that direction. She's going to turn, and I'm going to startle her. So I was trying to think of some little, small talky thing to say, just to kind of get her attention, so she knew somebody else was in the room. Because we're now we're just a few feet apart from each other. We're coming face to face. And I was going to comment of something like nice dress or something like that, remark on her unusual formal dress. And like I said, she's coming down the stairs. I'm walking to the foot of the stairs. We're now just a couple of feet. She still hasn't seen me. A couple of feet. As she's getting to those last 2-3 steps, pretty much to where I'm coming, I turn to her, and I'm about to say something, and she completely vanishes right in front of me. And like I said, she's like 2 feet, 3 feet away from me. And I stood there and I stared at the stairs because my thought, is what it was confused. What just happened? Did I just see that? What was that? I know I saw somebody walking down the stairs, and there's obviously nowhere she could have gone. And so I just kind of stood there at the bottom of the stairs staring at the stairs. And after a few moments, I continued into that little doorway down the hallway to the kitchen. And then another friend of mine was sitting in the kitchen, and she said, what happened? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I could see you, I could see down the hallway, I could see you coming, and then you just stopped, and you were apparently, because she couldn't see because it was just through the hallway, she said you were apparently staring at the stairs for a long time. And then after a long, you continued. What happened? What were you looking at? And so I kind of told her the story, and just as I finished telling her the story, the woman who owned the house walked in, and our mutual friend said, Richard just saw something. And the woman who owned the house said, what did she look like? And I said, how did you know it was a she? And the woman said, well, supposedly this house is haunted by a woman dressed in white. I said, well, then I think I've just met her.
See, that's the beauty of it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so that's my full-blown apparition story.
That's
but you were going to say, I'm sorry.
No. I mean, I said it's like the lady in white kind of thing. You've seen a lady in white. We always hear about the lady in white, the lady in gray over in the UK and Europe, but you don't hear about too many white ladies here in the States. So that's pretty cool.
And then in terms of GHOULA, we do, we've done a lot of events at various haunted places over the years. Again, it's kind of to have fun with the history and have fun with ghost stories. And we did one at the, and I'm blanking for a second, I think it was the Perry House. It's a historical home in that Heritage Square. I think it's in South Pasadena or Highland Park. Yeah. There's a little area where they put all the Victorian homes. They saved them from demolition from L.A. And so I was doing a ghost tour. I was taking people through the house and telling the history and the ghost lore connected to the house as we walked through the different rooms. And I would always say at the beginning, just so everybody understands, we are the only people here tonight. When I take you into the house, it'll just be me and you.
Mm-hmm.
There are no security guards in the house. There are no docents. It's completely empty. So if we're walking around the house and you see somebody in the house, there shouldn't be somebody there.
Okay.
You know, so keep your eyes open. You may see something tonight. And I found that just about every tour we did, I think 6 tours at that house.
Mm-hmm.
People saw things.
Mm-hmm.
There was even a tour that I was doing, and we were in the what used to be the dining room of the house, and I was standing with the site rep. She came on the tour with me, the person who's in charge of the historical property, to make sure we're not breaking anything. And she was standing next to me, and while I was telling this one story, you could hear footsteps coming down the hallway towards the dining room. And everybody stopped and looked, and I said, did everybody hear that? It said, yes. And then I turned to the site rep, and I said, is there anybody in the house? And she said, no, we're it. And then she went to look, because there shouldn't be anybody in the house. And she went up and down the hall, and she came back and said, there's nobody here. And obviously we all heard these footsteps on the wooden floor coming towards the dining room. So we have had a few things like that happen at some of our tours and some of our events.
And it's really cool when it does. It makes... Sorry? I said it's really cool when that happens, because it takes people who perhaps kind of go in half believing and opens their minds a little bit to the possibility that, hey, maybe this stuff really isn't just on TV, you know? Yeah. Right.
Now, obviously, it doesn't happen all the time.
No.
But it has happened at a few of our things. We did a Spirits of Spirits at the Aztec Hotel in, where is that? Monrovia, I think?
Yeah.
And so we had, we were at the bar, but the hotel was nice enough to let us do tours of the haunted room.
Nice.
So we would take people up, I think it was like 5 people at a time, because it's a tiny little room. And, and we had a guide, and they would take people up 5 at a time and show them the haunted room. And apparently there was one tour. I wasn't present, but there was one tour where crazy things happened to that group of people. The doors opening and closing, the doorknobs moving by themselves, all sorts of things like that. So yeah, sometimes it happens.
It does, and sometimes it's really kind of a weird thing that happens, because I was reading about Spirits with Spirits, but it reminded me of something that happened at Bordner's Bar in Hollywood, and I'm sure you've been there, because that's a fairly haunted bar. But the first time I was there, there's, when you go outside, they have that outside area, and then there's kind of like an alley over to one side, but it's a covered alley. All right. So I was just like, wandering around and looking around, and I started walking down the alley towards the street. And it's gated, of course, when you get to the end. But I got about halfway down, and I couldn't move. Couldn't take another step. And I thought, this is weird, and something is telling me you just can't do it, you can't do it. So I go back, and I get a hold of my friend Victoria, who's also a medium, and I said, walk down the alley, because, we don't tell them what's going on before we tell them to do something, right? And she walks down there, and she's like, gets to the point that I got to. She couldn't move either. And she's like, she says, this is not really very cool. She said, she started to describe this entity. And at the end of the alley, there was a big dumpster. Anyway, and she said it was living behind the dumpster, and there was a very huge AC unit on the wall that apparently was that this entity was getting energy from, but it was also draining energy from the people down the street who were coming out of the bar and walking down the street to their cars. And I'm like, thank God I'm not crazy, but something just wouldn't let me take it. And then she turns around. I mean, and you know this, there has to be funny or light moments when you're doing this kind of stuff anyway.
Right.
And she turns to me and she's kind of chuckling and she said, it's a good thing you can't see him. And I said, why? She said, he's taking a pee against the dumpster. Yeah. Which, I mean, that was a nice mental picture and it cracked me up. But, so things that we don't see and don't even think about might be there, and you might feel them. And that's, I think, one of the things that, people talk about going out and investigating with equipment and all these new things and everything. But I really think the human body is the best tool that we can use, because people say, well, I'm about as, empathic as a rock or something. But I swear everybody can do it. I mean, everybody feels it. Some people just don't know what they're feeling and admit to it, right?
And I completely agree with that. And to sort of case in point, we did an event, or we're going to do an event, and it got canceled at the last moment, but we were going to do this event called I called it the $1 Million Ghost Hunt. And the idea was that, there's the $1 Million Theater downtown. It's a huge movie palace.
Right.
They gave us access to the theater on I think it was 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon. They said you can do whatever you want in the theater. Nobody's there. You got it for 3 hours. So I came up with this idea that I thought would be fun, where basically I invited everybody to come down, and I think it was $5 a person, which went to the restoration of the theater. Mm-hmm. And the idea was that everybody who arrived would get a map of the theater and a pencil. And we would just ask you to wander around the theater, and you could go anywhere, the projection booth, the dressing rooms backstage, the restrooms, wherever you wanted to go, you could wander. And all we asked was that if you felt anything or experienced anything, or even if you just got the willies or whatever, to make an X on your map where it happened. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the 3 hours, after you've wandered around, we would collect all the maps, and then we would see if there was certain areas like hot spots where everybody felt something. Mm-hmm. And then we'd see if it corresponded with the history and the ghost lore of that theater. Mm-hmm. I don't know, kind of a fun thought in my head of, something we could do.
Right.
And I got a lot of flack from the paranormal community. I got a lot of emails from paranormal investigators saying that I was making kind of a mockery of paranormal investigation.
Really?
That you can't have sort of civilians wandering around. It's got to be at nighttime. You got to lock down the environment. They had all these rules as to what, if you're going to do a proper ghost hunt, all the rules that you have to follow. Mm-hmm. And my response back was kind of what your point was. The people who have seen the ghost in that theater over the years were not paranormal investigators. They were average people who worked at the theater. Right. And they happened at different times during the day. They happened, some sightings occur in the morning, some sightings occurred in the evening. But they were average people just going about their job, walking around the theater. Right. So what does it hurt to have average people walk through the same space and see if they feel something? Why do we need to have all the equipment and lock it down and infrared cameras and motion sensors? And my theory is, or my thought is, as you said, that, if a place has enough activity and is strong enough, you should be able to feel it. Mm-hmm. Or most people should be able to feel it, or some people should be able to feel it.
I think everybody can, but they just, like I said, don't admit to it, or they don't know what they're feeling, so they can't admit to it. Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Sort of my vindication, I guess, is, like I said, we unfortunately had to cancel that event at the last moment. So we never actually did it, but I was able to do it a couple years later. We did a screening at the Pioneer Cemetery in the San Fernando Valley. Yeah. Old cemetery. Mm-hmm. It was the cemetery, kind of what most people know about it, if they know at all about it, is the cemetery that was used in Plan 9 from Outer Space. Yeah. The sort of horrible Bela Lugosi horror film. Uh-huh. They used this cemetery. And the reason they used the cemetery was because it was abandoned, so they didn't have to get permission. They just, went in and filmed it there without any permission. Mm-hmm. But we were going to show the movie outdoor screening at the cemetery. And I said, if anybody wants to come like an hour early, let's do this experiment. I'll give you a map of the cemetery. You can wander around before the movie. If you feel anything, just put an X on the map.
Mm-hmm.
I'll collect them before the movie. We'll watch the movie, and then afterwards, I'll reveal if there are any hot spots, and I will tell you the ghost stories, and we'll have a historian here to see if it matches anything that's known about the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at this time, this was years ago, not much was known about the cemetery because, like I said, it was abandoned since the 1930s, meaning that not only did people vandalize it, but people stole tombstones.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would return the tombstones, but not where they were, or they'd move tombstones around. So when the Historical Society came in the 70s, they had no idea where anybody was buried.
Yeah.
They just had this huge piece of land with all these sort of random tombstones tipped over.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of months before our screening, they had, for the very first time, done sonar to see where all the bodies are buried. Now, they still wouldn't know who's where and where the tombstone should go, but at least they would know where the bodies are.
Uh-huh.
So this was not known. It had just happened. The Historical Society was privy to this information, but anybody walking around the cemetery would have no idea where anybody was buried. There's no indications or cues or anything to say, a body's right here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even some deceptive things, because in the 70s, when they didn't know where bodies were, they put in walkways.
Oh.
And obviously they didn't know where the bodies were, so the walkways most likely go over graves.
Right.
So just because you're on a walkway doesn't mean that there's nobody under you.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we did the experiment, and we did, showed the movie, and then I went through them, and I discovered that there was one corner of the cemetery that just about everybody who did the experiment, and it's about 80 people that decided to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So out of 80 maps, just about everybody honed in on one corner of the cemetery, and there were X's in that corner.
Wow.
And that was the spot that everybody felt something.
Uh-huh.
So I revealed this at the end, that everybody felt something in that one corner, and we had the historian then tell us if there's anything unusual about that corner.
Mm-hmm.
And she was shocked because when they did the sonar, they found out something that they didn't know about the cemetery, which was that there was a mass grave in the cemetery.
Ah.
So in addition to the bodies lined up, there's one spot where there were just bodies piled on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that was the spot that everybody felt something weird about. It's still kind of a mystery as to what that story is, of why there's a mass grave at this cemetery. And there's some theories as to why.
Right.
But it did work out. Everybody felt something weird at this one corner, and they had obviously no idea that there were bodies there, let alone there was a mass grave there.
Uh-huh.
And everybody somehow sensed it or honed in on it.
Well, there's probably residual energy, maybe, and it's palpable.
So so you should trust those feelings.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important. All right, so you've got lots of upcoming events listed on the website, and the next big event that you're doing is Midsummer Scream on July 30th and 31st at the Long Beach Convention Center. And for those who may not be familiar with the event, can you fill them in a little bit?
Yeah, it's a festival dedicated to Halloween, which may sound odd to have a Halloween festival in the middle of summer, but the idea behind it is this is a festival for people who are really into Halloween and want to know what's going on in Halloween so they can plan for it. So not only is it for people to find out what's going to be happening in Los Angeles at Halloween, but it's also an opportunity for all the various venues, whether it's Knott's Berry Farm or Magic Mountain, to kind of premiere and preview the things that they're going to be doing for their Halloween events. Mm-hmm. So it's this huge celebration for Halloween, and people who enjoy going out and doing things, in October for Halloween. And this year they're doing, and I'm a part of, they're doing a sort of paranormal section of the convention floor. Because normally it's all about what they call the haunts, which are the themed attractions, like Knott's Berry Farm has, or Universal Studios has. But this year they decided to open it up to ghost tours, haunted destinations, things that are in the sort of the paranormal realm, to let people know of what those venues and places and people are doing this Halloween. So there's going to be, like, obviously the Queen Mary is going to have a booth there to talk about their ghost tours. The Winchester Mystery House is going to have a presence there. They're doing a huge panel discussion of, like, basically everything you've ever wanted to know about the Winchester Mystery House, with rare photographs, and they're bringing artifacts from the house. And then it's going to be, obviously, I'm going to have a booth there, and our friend Scott Michaels with Dearly Departed is going to have a presence there.
Right.
So, yeah, if you're into this stuff and you want to know what's coming up in the next couple of months, it's kind of a place that you can go and kind of talk to all these people and see what's going on. Additionally, we are doing, as sort of an added bonus, what we're calling the Museum of Paranormal History. It's going to be a little exhibit of haunted or cursed objects. So you can come and see up close actual haunted and or cursed objects. And, it'll have the object and then the story behind it.
That's
including, since I'll give you a little preview, since we just talked about this, we are going to have one of the tombstones from the Pioneer Cemetery is going to be on display, with permission, obviously, from the Historical Society, because part of the lore of that place is that in the, like I said, people would steal tombstones, gravestones, and they would take them to their house and put them in their yards, I guess, which I can't imagine, but I guess there was a time when people would go steal gravestones and stick them in their backyard as like a conversation piece.
Okay.
And there are claims that the people who did this would suddenly discover the ghosts of Victorian people wandering around their backyards. And once they discovered the Victorian ghosts, they would then take the gravestone out of their yard and bring it back to the cemetery and dump it over the fence. So all the tombstones have this sort of weird, sort of haunted lore connected to it. There are even stories, because my grandfather lived in the San Fernando Valley, and he used to tell stories that hot rodders would go steal tombstones and put them in their hot rods for racing, I guess, to weight down the car. And there are claims that they would be in the race and they'd look over and see a ghost sitting in the seat next to them, or they would get in a crash and they would wake up and there would be a Victorian ghost in their room at the, in the hospital. And they would immediately have the tombstone removed from their car and thrown back into the cemetery. So they're allowing us to tell the story and to have one of those haunted tombstones on display. So maybe we'll get a Victorian ghost haunting the convention hall because we've moved the tombstone. But anyway, so that it's going to be objects like that, sort of interesting, unusual objects that have these sort of stories connected to them.
And you're going to be, your booth is number 137, if I'm not mistaken?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, I can't wait to see that tombstone. I'm going to, for those who are listening, if anybody's in the area, this is not going to make a mass draw to the thing, but I will be there too. I'm going to be over at Richard's booth. I'm going to go over and see Scott Michaels at his booth. I'm going to be bringing some Ghosts of Hollywood books and signing them. So, but there's just so much neat stuff to do there. I just kept reading it, and the website is really...
Like I said, there's going to be sort of an unprecedented discussion about the Winchester Mystery House, which is going to be amazing. They're also doing a panel on haunted amusement parks, where they're going to have people telling the ghost stories of all of our local amusement parks. There's going to be a panel discussion on haunted bars, which I'll be a part of, discussing the sort of local haunted bars. So, yeah, a lot of fun stuff going on that weekend. Yeah, and I will have books as well. I'll be signing my book as well.
Yay! I'll sign one for you if you'll sign one for me.
Very deal.
Yeah, it's a nice trade-off, huh? I think I'll be getting the better end of the deal, but still, it's not a bad thing. Um, I was okay. Again, back at the website, I was looking at stuff, and recently you collaborated with the Institute for Art and Olfaction to help create a series of perfumes based on the smells associated with local ghosts. I definitely want to hear more about that.
Okay, so, well, I mean, obviously you know this, and probably most of your listeners know this, but a lot of ghost stories have a smell component to them.
Right.
Where people not only experience something, but they'll smell something. Mm-hmm. The most famous example of this locally would be the Peggy whistle at the Hollywood sign.
Uh-huh.
The woman who committed suicide off of the H. People who hike the areas or people who walk their dog in the area will claim that they will smell a very strong aroma of gardenia when gardenias are not in bloom and there are no gardenias up there.
Right.
And it is said that was her favorite perfume, and you kind of know when her spirit is near because you can smell the gardenias.
Mm-hmm.
So going with that idea, we decided to sort of, spotlight the 13 smelliest ghosts of Los Angeles, for lack of a better term. And they created a series of perfumes based on the what witnesses say certain ghosts smell like.
Wow.
So, and then it was a package with the perfumes, and then there was also a map of all the haunted places that you could go visit, and all the stories of each smell.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, they're actually a great organization. If anybody's interested in perfume, I highly recommend them. They have really good events all year long, but they approached me with this question of, are there any ghosts that have a certain smell? And I said, oh, yes. And so we collaborated on this project, and it went very well. So we're probably going to do it again with another 13 smelly ghosts.
Oh, wow.
Possibly next year.
That's very cool.
It was fun. It's a kind of a different way of thinking about ghosts, and kind of also sort of what GHOULA does, which is try to have fun with the idea of ghosts and ghost lore, and kind of introduce you to a little history.
Well,
so if you do take the map and go around, you will end up going to a lot of historic places and hearing a lot of great sort of old Hollywood history, in addition to being able to smell what people claim the ghosts smell like.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's funny, but it's a very clever idea. It is.
And theoretically, if you want to smell like a famous ghost, you can apply the perfume.
Yeah, go out and get some gardenias, and and then you can smell just like Peg and Twistle.
But it was fun. My personal favorite of the group, of the ones we chose, was Valentino.
Yeah.
Because his ghost is a personal favorite of mine. As you are aware, probably, that his ghost has been seen just about everywhere in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
Everywhere in Los Angeles.
Yep.
He really gets around in the afterworld. To the point where it's almost, I always say that he doesn't haunt one location, he haunts our city. He's almost like a ghost mascot of Los Angeles, because he's just everywhere and seen everywhere.
Yeah.
And I was able to track down, of the many sightings around the city, I was able to track down one sighting that involved his smell. So we were able to include Valentino in the group of ghost smells. And
what does he smell like?
According to the witness, he smelled like, he wore a very specific cologne, apparently, and that's what people claim they smell, is that specific cologne, which was sort of a citrus cologne, so it smelled like oranges. Okay. So apparently in life, if you ran into Valentino, he would have smelled like oranges. And there are places in Beverly Hills where they claim that you still smell him when his ghost goes by. You smell that sort of cologne, that sort of orange-based cologne.
And I kind of like the idea that they do. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but we had like Miguel Leonis of the Leonis Adobe. Apparently, he smells like soap. There's the firehouse downtown that's now a restaurant. I forget what it's called. But they smell smoke like of a fire. So we had that smell. There's the smell of car exhaust that people claim they smell in Thelma Todd's garage. So it's not just perfumes and colognes, but a wide variety of different smells that are connected to these ghosts. So yeah, that was kind of a fun project.
And isn't it funny that some smells, I mean, like you've heard this from people, they'll say that, well, my grandmother came to visit and she smells like roses because that was her favorite scent or her favorite flower. But I think it's interesting that not all of these scents are like aftershave or perfume or something. I mean, the exhaust at Thelma Todd's garage makes perfect sense. That's how she died. And I like the fact that they're trying to identify themselves to a particular situation, so it's kind of like, for sure that's who it is, in a way, right?
Well, and I just came across this one, which will probably be featured in our next go-around with this idea. But is it the Western author Zen Gray? He had a house in Catalina, and people claim that they smell cooked fish when his ghost is around, because apparently he would cook fish there so often that you knew when he was staying at the Catalina house, when you walked by and you would smell the fish being cooked. And they say to this day, people walking through the house will suddenly get a strong odor of fish being cooked, even though there's nobody in the kitchen. So yeah, it is interesting what odors accompany which ghosts.
Yeah, it is, and very, very clever that they're doing that. Again, is kind of to make sure you know who it is. The other thing that I like about the website is that you've got maps. You've got stuff about haunted attractions. You've got ghost links. You've got ghost maps, and so much more. And I mean, I was looking at them, and I was looking at some of the haunted bar things, and I've been to Borders, I've been to Yamashiro, I've been to the Formosa Cafe and the Roosevelt, and it's just kind of neat. It's like when you're watching something on TV that's in another country or someplace in another state, and you look at that and you go, oh, I've been there. There's a little bit of an identity to it. And so I mean, there's just a whole lot to do on your website. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was the Ouija board exchange program.
Yeah, this was an idea when we first started GHOULA. I'm sad to say it actually hasn't come to really fruition. But the idea was that if you had an old Ouija board that you wanted to get rid of, that basically we would take it. And then anybody who was looking for a Ouija board, we would, hand them out. So we would find the Ouija board in a new home. That was kind of the idea behind it. Unfortunately, although good in theory, our experience, nobody's really giving up their Ouija boards, or at least giving them up to us. So we've gotten a lot of requests over the years for Ouija boards, but unfortunately we don't have the Ouija boards on hand to hand out.
Well,
that was kind of the idea behind it.
Yeah, well, it's a good idea because I'm sure there are people somewhere along the line that get one and think, oh my God, they just, what was it, Zuzu? What's the bad spirit that supposedly comes through Ouija boards? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, they're going to scare the heck out of them. What are your thoughts on Ouija boards in general? Are they dangerous? Do they bring in boogity boogities or what?
That's a hard question because it is a kid's toy. It is made by Parker Brothers. I don't know. I mean, I've heard a lot of really great stories about Ouija boards. I tend to think that it doesn't let things through, but then, like I said, I've heard some really great stories about Ouija boards. So I don't know. I haven't heard any bad stories, to be honest, other than like urban legends.
Right.
But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, actually?
I look at them, even though it's a kid's thing, it didn't start out necessarily be a kid's thing, but
Right.
whoever, Parker Brothers, whoever got involved in it, because, I mean, we've got a Ouija board here that dates back to like 1890.
Yeah.
And, they're very cool, and they weren't mass produced back then or anything. It was kind of during the spiritualist movement. So I kind of look at Ouija boards as a tool of divination, just like a pendulum, just like, scrying,
Right.
just like any kind of thing like that. And so I think that, you can contact spirit through them and whatever. But I think people that do any sort of divination, and that even includes paranormal investigating, needs to know what you're doing before you get started. And there are precautions in anything that you do that has anything to do with the metaphysical or the paranormal. You have to know what you're doing. And so I think the people that I've heard that had really bad Ouija board experiences were A, not protected, B, making a joke of it, and C, just not knowing what they were doing, and they,
Right.
got into some trouble. But it's not the board that is bad. It's not, the pendulum that's bad. It's not the scrying mirror that's bad. It's the
Right.
pilot, and that's the thing. It's where your mind is and what you know and how to do it. And as you know as well as I do, when we're dealing with people that are on the other side, we have to respect them. And if we think it's a dog and pony show, you're going to get
Right.
maybe slapped upside the head. It happens. So, yeah, I'm not afraid of Ouija boards, and I don't think, that they're bad in themselves because it's an object. But
Right.
and they're not all possessed, not like a haunted object that belonged to somebody that object is very dear to them and they'll hang around the object. This is something that came hot off the presses, and you can buy it at Toys R Us. So it's not like these boards are possessed, but when you do any sort of divination and you call in the dead, you have to expect that things might happen, and if you're not taking it seriously, then, if it's like the fire, you're going to get too close to it and get burnt.
Right.
So, yeah. So, but I'm sure, Ouija's and everything else, it's all in the knowledge. And that's why I was saying earlier about people that do paranormal investigations. There are so many out there that are not there for the right reasons. I did, and if you've read my books, my books are all pretty much historically based. And a lot of history, and I went to places that not everybody wrote about. There were a lot of places that nobody heard about. I mean, the Formosa Cafe, for example, I walked in there one day and I just kind of, ordered food and looked at the waitress and I said, I said, this is an old place. I said, do you have any ghosts? And oh my God, you'd think that, and you know this, it just spewed out of her. Oh my God, yeah. And then she called over one of the busboys, and then she called over, and and then the owner came by. And this is how we learn. But the main thing for me, I think, is the history. I mean, I like that the spirits are still there, but
I always say that haunted places are historic places, and vice versa. It's like you really can't separate the two. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know the history of a place, which is a pet peeve of mine with some ghost hunters that just go in and investigate and don't care about the history or who was there before them or whatever. But I was going to also want to touch on, because you said this about the Formosa and stuff. It is shocking to me just how many places that once you start asking around are haunted. It's fascinating to me. And LA kind of has a bad reputation in terms of not being haunted, or but I would argue that it is possibly the most haunted city in the country. If you go by just how many stories, and like I say, like I just said, it's kind of tied to the history, and I would argue that California and Los Angeles has some of the most interesting history of any place in the country. If you go back to the Spanish occupation, the Native Americans, the Spanish, becoming part of the United States, the whole cowboy era. We have pirate history that people don't realize we do, that rivals anything New Orleans have. We have gangster history that rivals anything Chicago has. And then, as I always say, we don't just have ghosts, but we have famous ghosts. We have the whole Hollywood and that stuff. And if you think about, like, some of the biggest or the most gruesome murders of the 20th century, a lot of them were in Los Angeles, whether it's the Mansons or OJ, the Black Dahlia. Yep. We have more than our fair share of really dark history. And, and our ghosts kind of reflect that history. And so, we have, I have a friend that, as a sort of side note, every year in October, some newspaper or magazine will do a list of the most haunted cities in the country. And generally speaking, LA will never make the list. It's always New Orleans, Chicago, Boston, and LA never makes the list. And what he does, he shows me just because he knows it'll rile me up. But I would argue we could go toe to toe with any other city in the country. The problem is most people don't know it. Like I said, there are these like hidden histories. If you ask people, it's the Queen Mary and the Roosevelt Hotel, and then there's nothing else, and which is not true. And that's kind of what our group tried to do by doing these unusual things, like the ghost perfumes, or as you mentioned, the puppet show in a haunted puppet theater. It's to show people we have a wide variety of ghost stories, that match our sort of unusual history.
Exactly.
Sorry. Anyway.
No, honestly,
rant there.
No, I rant about it quite often, so I'm glad I have a fellow ranter here. But we are running out of time, so I want to let people, since we've talked about the website so much, tell everybody where they go to find your website so they can learn and
it's GHOULA.org. So it's GHOULA, GHOULA, or Ghost Hunters of Urban Los Angeles, GHOULA.org. And, we post what events we're doing, or there's a mailing list that you can sign up, and we'll tell you about the events before they come. And so that's where to check.
Great. Well, thank you for coming on and talking. I'm going to have you back because we need to kind of banter back and forth about stuff, LA stuff, because we just don't get enough press, like you said. So we'll do that down the line. But I want to thank you for coming over tonight, and I will see you on Sunday at some point.
Yes.
And,
thank you, and hopefully we'll see others there as well.
That's right. And they can go to midsummerscream.org. That's the website, I believe, if they want to find out more about that as well. And until next time, everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at this same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2014. Moonlight Hall by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.